a large population of Windows users migrated to Linux. Surprisingly, many in this population appears to have migrated to Zorin specifically.
Where I've been a Linux guy for like 6 years, and Windows has never had the worst reputation in the public that it has had for a while now,
Right now, millions of people are quietly walking away from Windows, and Microsoft has no one to blame but itself. Not hackers, not a scandal, not a rival tech giant with a billion-dollar campaign. Just a company that kept pushing its own users until they stopped pushing back and started leaving. And the place they're going? A Linux distro most people had never heard of 2 years ago. That just crossed 2 million downloads in under 90 days. In this video, you're going to find out exactly how Microsoft cornered its own customers, why a small Linux distribution is winning the war Microsoft didn't even know it was fighting, and what this actually means for the future of your desktop, whether you stay on Windows or not. Stay with me, because the numbers alone are going to surprise you. To understand why this is happening, you need to understand the moment it all broke. October 14th, 2025. The official end of Windows 10 support. No more security patches, no more updates. If you were still running Windows 10 that morning, and hundreds of millions of people were, your computer was now officially exposed, unsupported, on its own. That alone would have been enough to create frustration. But here's where it gets almost cinematic. The exact same day Windows 10 support ended, Zorin OS 18 launched. Microsoft shut a door, Zorin opened one. And it was already standing right there in the hallway, holding it open with a smile on its face. That is not luck. That is timing so perfect, it almost feels scripted. But before we get into what Zorin actually is and why it's working so well, we need to talk about the walls Microsoft spent years building around its own users. Because that backstory is what makes everything else make sense. It didn't happen overnight. Microsoft built this trap over several years, one decision at a time. It started with hardware requirements. Windows 11 requires something called TPM 2.0, a security chip, along with newer generation processors. On paper, that sounds reasonable. In practice, it meant that millions of computers that worked perfectly fine, no crashes, no slowdowns, no problems, were suddenly declared incompatible. Not broken, not dangerous, just incompatible by a rule Microsoft wrote. Think about what that actually means. You have a laptop, it runs fine. You can browse, work, stream, do everything you need, and one day a corporation tells you your machine is no longer welcome in our ecosystem. Upgrade or get out. Then came the second wall, advertising. Literal advertisements inside the operating system you paid for, inside the Start menu, inside File Explorer, inside the interface you look at every single day. That is not a feature. That is Microsoft treating its own paying customers as an audience to monetize. Then the third wall, telemetry, data collection baked into the system, with opt-outs scattered across settings menus like Microsoft was hoping you wouldn't find them all. Then the fourth, Copilot, an AI assistant pushed into your taskbar whether you wanted it or not, running in the background, processing your behavior, integrated into workflows you never asked it to touch. And if none of that convinced you to upgrade, Microsoft had one final offer. Pay for extended Windows 10 security updates. Temporarily, for a while longer, until they decided to stop. Pay to stay. Pay to upgrade. Or get out. That is not a company managing a product transition. That is a company squeezing its users from every possible direction simultaneously and calling it progress. Now here's the number that should stop you cold. Analysts at Canalys ran the math. 240 million PCs, 1 in 5 computers on the entire planet, declared incompatible by Microsoft's requirements. Machines that work. Machines that browse, run spreadsheets, handle video calls, do everything their owners need them to do. If you stacked all those machines as folded laptops, the pile would reach 600 kilometers higher than the moon. And Microsoft, the same company publicly talking about sustainability and carbon neutrality, was sending every single one of them toward the landfill. Researchers estimate the e-waste from this single decision could generate over 1 billion pounds of toxic waste, lead, mercury, cadmium, leaching into soil. While Microsoft was talking green, it was manufacturing one of the largest e-waste events in consumer technology history. That is the wall. That is the corner. That is why people started looking for the exit. So let's talk about what people actually found when they started looking. Zorin OS is a Linux distribution, meaning it's a free open source operating system built on top of Ubuntu, one of the most trusted Linux foundations in existence. It's been around for years, quietly building a reputation in tech circles. But for most regular Windows users, it was completely invisible until recently. What changed? Zorin figured out something that the entire Linux world had been failing to understand for decades. The reason people don't switch to Linux isn't technical. It's psychological. Most people don't avoid Linux because it can't do what they need. They avoid it because they're afraid of feeling lost. Afraid of having to relearn everything from scratch. Afraid of sitting down in front of a new system and not knowing where anything is. That fear, that single friction point, has kept Linux as a niche tool for enthusiasts and developers for 30 years, while Windows dominated the mainstream without even trying that hard. Zorin looked at that fear and built its entire user experience around eliminating it. Windows-style taskbar. Windows-style start menu. System tray in exactly the position you expect. Snap layouts. App search. Dark mode. Dynamic wallpapers. Clean, centered UI. Rounded corners. Translucency. Smooth animations. When a Windows user sits down in front of Zorin OS for the first time, the biggest fear is gone within about 30 seconds. Because everything is more or less where they expected it to be. And here's what matters. It doesn't feel like a knockoff. It feels intentional. Like someone actually sat down and thought about the real human being on the other side of the screen, not just the technical specifications of an operating system, but the familiar interface is just the surface. What's underneath is where things get genuinely interesting, and that's what most people don't find out until after they install it. We'll get there. But first, there's something about the installation process itself that changed the entire conversation about Linux accessibility. And it's worth spending a moment on. For years, honestly for decades, the most common reason people gave for never trying Linux was simple. It's too hard to install. And for a long time, that was actually true. Terminal commands, partition management, driver hunting, compatibility nightmares. Installing Linux used to feel like a test you hadn't studied for. Zorin OS 18 killed that excuse. Full installation in minutes. Click-through setup with clear, plain language options. Automatic driver detection and handling. NVIDIA drivers available as a checkbox during the install process. Telemetry opt-out shown clearly and honestly during setup, not buried 3 menus deep. The erase disk and install option is right there on screen, clearly labeled with no ambiguity about what it does, no command line required, no partition editor to navigate, no tutorial videos to watch before you begin. And here's the part that matters most for anyone coming from Windows. The Zorin installer automatically detects if you have Windows installed and offers to set up a dual boot side by side. You keep Windows. You boot into Zorin, you try it for a few weeks, you realize you haven't touched Windows once. That is not a nuclear decision. That is a test drive. The last major psychological barrier to trying Linux just got removed, and that is not a small thing. That is the same kind of moment when smartphones finally got simple enough that your parents started using them without needing your help. But here's what really surprised people after installation. because the interface and the easy setup are the parts that get the headlines. The part that actually kept people from going back was something quieter and honestly more significant. Once you're inside Zorin OS, the absence of things hits you before the presence of anything else. No advertisements anywhere in the interface, not in the menu, not in the file manager, not in the settings. Zero, no forced account login to use your own computer. No AI assistant running silently in the background, processing your activity, learning your patterns, sending data somewhere you can't fully audit. No telemetry services you have to hunt down and disable one by one. No background processes you can't identify, can't stop, can't explain. Updates happen when you decide, not when Microsoft schedules them, not at 3 a.m. before an important morning, when you choose. Now, some of these things sound like minor conveniences, but step back and think about what they actually represent together. The difference between Windows 11 and Zorin OS isn't just aesthetic. It's the difference between owning a computer and paying rent to use one. Windows 11 is a platform, Microsoft's platform, built for Microsoft's interests, which sometimes overlap with yours and sometimes don't. Every ad placement, every telemetry expansion, every forced AI integration is Microsoft making a business decision that affects your daily experience without asking you. Zorin OS is just a computer. It does what you tell it to do. It runs what you install. It doesn't have its own agenda running in the background. And then there's performance, because this is where things get practical very fast. Lower idle RAM usage than Windows 11 on the same hardware, noticeably faster on modest machines. Computers that felt slow and sluggish on Windows feel responsive again on Zorin, because there's no background telemetry consuming resources, no hidden processes running silently, no bloat accumulated over years of updates. For older hardware especially, the very machines Microsoft declared incompatible, this isn't just a feature, it's a resurrection. You take a computer that Windows 11 rejected, and within an hour, it's running a modern, polished, secure operating system faster than it ran Windows 3 years ago. Zorin runs on all 240 million of those machines Microsoft tried to send to the landfill. Every single one of them. Now, how does software actually work on this system? Because that has historically been the third big barrier after fear in installation. And the answer surprised even people who already knew Linux reasonably well. Installing software on Linux has a reputation. A bad one. Terminal commands, cryptic syntax, dependencies that don't resolve, forum threads from 2014 that may or may not still apply. Zorin quietly solved most of that. Click a .deb file and a clean installation window appears. Not a terminal prompt. A window exactly like you'd expect on any modern OS. App images work by clicking them, accepting one permission prompt, and running. That's the entire process. The App Store handles the rest with a search bar and an install button for everyday tasks, browsing, documents, email, video. You will never need to open a terminal. Not once. One honest note on gaming. Zorin runs games through Proton, and some titles perform at near Windows levels. Others don't. If gaming is your absolute top priority, there are more specialized Linux options built for that. No overselling here. And that honesty is exactly what builds trust with new users. 2 million downloads in 90 days, nearly 800,000 from former Windows users in the latest release alone. Linux desktop share has historically sat around 2 to 3%, a ceiling so persistent that the year of Linux on the desktop became a running joke. That joke is getting less funny. What makes this moment different from every previous Linux prediction is that the push isn't coming from the Linux side. It's coming from Microsoft. 240 million displaced users. Zorin positioned directly in their path. The math after that is straightforward, and here's the downstream effect almost nobody is talking about yet. If even 5% of those users migrate permanently, developers start prioritizing Linux, hardware vendors start certifying Linux compatibility, and the entire ecosystem shifts. The users move first, everything else follows. Microsoft handed Zorin this moment. Zorin was just ready for it. Let's be clear about what really happened. Microsoft didn't lose these users to a superior campaign or a billion-dollar competitor. It lost them because it stopped treating users like customers and started treating them like a resource to manage. Ads inside a paid OS, forced AI integrations, hardware incompatibility on perfectly working machines. Every one of those decisions sent the same message. Your preference isn't part of the equation. Users heard it, and they left. Zorin didn't steal them. Microsoft handed them over, one policy at a time. What makes this genuinely significant isn't the download numbers. It's what they prove. That a regular, non-technical person can install a Linux system in an afternoon, feel at home within a day, and never seriously miss Windows. That proof is new, and it changes the conversation permanently. If you're still curious, Dual Boot is free, the install takes minutes, and you lose nothing by trying. And this conversation isn't over. In the next video, we're looking at whether Windows 12 can reverse any of this, or whether what Microsoft has already announced is about to make this exodus even worse. That one's coming soon, so make sure you're subscribed. And if this gave you something to think about, the like button takes 1 second.